Hello and welcome to The Understudy, the channel that teaches you everything about musical theater. My name is Philippa and today I will read from Broadway Musicals, The 101 Greatest Shows of All Time by Ken Bloom and Frank Blasnick. To get the full version of the book, I recommend getting the physical copy as images and certain inserts from the book won't be displayed here. I do not own this material, I'm just reading from a place of entertainment and education, and I will not edit these audio recordings as I go, so you will get the unabridged version. Today I will go through Section R. Ragtime opened January 18th, 1998 at the Ford Center for Performing Arts with 834 performances. Produced by Livent US Inc., book by Terrence McNally, music by Stephen Flaherty, lyrics by Lynn Ahrens. Based on the novel by E.L. Doctorow. Music orchestrated by William David Braun. Musical director, David Lude. Dance music arranged by David Crane. Vocal arrangements by Stephen Flaherty. Directed by Frank Galati. Musical staging by Graciela Danielle. Production design by Eugene Lee. Costume design by Santo Loquasto. Lighting design by Jules Fisher and Peggy Eisenhower. Synopsis. 1902. Mother, father, and mother's young brother live in New Rochelle. Coalhouse Walker and his love Sarah are blacks confronting racism, and the immigrant Tate and his little girl have escaped from Eastern Europe. When Sarah abandons her new baby in mother's garden, she is brought into the family, setting the wheels in motion for a remarkable tale of human courage and growth in America at the beginning of the 20th century. Mother becomes a modern woman. Coalhouse evolves into a radical and then a terrorist, and Tate rises from the factories to become a movie pioneer. All the characters' paths intertwine more than once, and each is changed forever, just as their country is. Cast. Father, Mark Jacoby. Mother, Marin Mazzie. Mother's younger brother, Stephen Sutcliffe. Coalhouse Walker, Brian Stokes Mitchell. Sarah, Audra MacDonald. Tate, Peter Friedman. Emma Goldman, Judy Kay. Evelyn Nesbit, Leland Perry. The era in which the musical Ragtime is set is an unbeatably rich period in American history, with the newfangled inventions seemingly changing people's lives overnight. The emergence of cities, class struggles, and racial conflicts. Throngs of huddled masses flowing from Europe, looking for a better life and finding near slavery in factories of a newly industrialized land. Ruthless robbers, barons juxtaposed with the honest, rags-to-riches optimism of the self-made man. And above all, the wonderful, syncopated new music that seemed to encompass all the hopes, dreams, and bittersweet regret of a country. The moving and expansive novel Ragtime by E.L. Doctorow encompassed all of these themes, throwing in many real-life historical names in the bargain. Though it seemed a wonderful choice for musicalization, Doctorow wasn't enthusiastic about the adaptation of his novel for Broadway, since the film version had not met his liking. Producer Garth Drabinsky, the P.T. Barnum of his day, finally convinced the author that his work would be presented in a first-class production by top-drawer talent. Harold Prince, then intimately involved in Drabinsky's company, Livent, through his production of Showboat and Kiss of the Spider Woman, suggested that 10 songwriting teams write 4 songs each on spec. 8 teams agreed, among with the composer Stephen Flaherty and lyricist Lynn Ahrens. Hardly household names, Ahrens and Flaherty showed impressive versatility as the writers of the off-Broadway charmer Lucky Stiff, the Caribbean-flavored hit Once on This Island, and My Favorite Year, adapted from the film of the same name. Buckling down and submitting to their audition score, they got the assignment. Meanwhile, Drabinsky, never a producer to do anything halfway, gained control of the Lyric and Apollo theaters on 42nd and 43rd Streets in order to demolish them and build a new theater that would open with Ragtime. As the theater took shape, brick by brick, the production set off on its road to Broadway, with productions in Toronto and Los Angeles before the Broadway opening. When it arrived in New York, the paint on the brand new Ford Center was barely dry. Along the way, Aarons and Flaherty, along with the book writer Terrence McNally, director Frank Galati, and choreographer Graciela Danielle, had had 2 years to hone the material, writing and rewriting, always under the micromanaging eye of Dobrinsky. Perhaps Dobrinsky saw himself as David O. Selznick, marshalling the resources for his epic Gone with the Wind, for Ragtime was a truly theatrical epic, a musical of great scope historically, societally, and emotionally. The finished product couldn't possibly please everyone and was not quite as faithful to the novel as Doctorow might have wished, but after all, it was an extraordinarily vast, unwieldy source to distill into 3 hours. In addition, the necessarily episodic nature of the script made some of the score seem more narrative than experimental. Still, in the stunning opening sequence, with the 3 storylines of Tate, Coalhouse, and Mother swirling about the stage in the foreshadowing of the dramatic interweaving to come, Ragtime was a joy to behold. The score, criticized by some as consisting of one anthem after another, beautifully captured the emotional landscape of its characters. Our Children, Back to Before, Your Daddy's Son, and Wheel of Dream are all stunningly modern theater songs. They were those who thought the proceedings approximately grand and moving, but also those who decried the sentimentality and epic proportions, preferring The Lion King, which opened the same season. Audiences, however, loved the show, and Ragtime appeared to have settled in for an extended run, perhaps even rivaling the English mega-hits. With incredibly high running costs, however, compounded with the implosion of Livent Inc. amid lawsuits, charges of bookkeeping irregularities, and fraud, the show closed prematurely, denying the author a superhit. Maybe McNally, Aarons, and Flaherty should write their next show about the rise and fall of Garth Drabinsky, a character as complex and colorful as any of those in Ragtime. Brian Stokes Mitchell. The charismatic singer and actor Brian Stokes Mitchell made an early name for himself on television, starring with other Broadway musical actors Mary McCarthy, Gregory Harrison, and Pernell Roberts, who had the bad luck to star in 2 shows that closed out of town, Mata Hari and Gone with the Wind. As Jackpot Jackson on Trapperton MD, coming east with the Michael Rupert musical Mail, which began as the Pasadena Playhouse, he starred in David Merrick's ill-fated revival of OK, after ably acquitting himself as Gregory Hines' replacement in Jelly's Last Jam, and starring opposite Howard McGilling and Vanessa Williams in the strongly sung second cast of Kiss of the Spider-Woman. Mitchell took on the role of Coalhouse Walker in Ragtime, singing, acting, and dancing with star-making power. Exploring his comic, hammy side opposite Ragtime co-star Marin Mazzie in the very fine revival of Kiss Me Kate, he won a Tony Award for his performance as Fred Graham. And after a dramatic performance in August Wilson's King Hedley II, Mitchell returned to the Martin Beck Theatre as Don Quixote in the 2002 revival of Man of La Mancha. Becoming a star in revivals, Mitchell, along with other talented performers like Donna Murphy, Brent Barrett, and Christine Ebersole, desperately deserves a brand new Broadway show tailored to his gifts. The Red Mill opened September 24, 1906 at the Knickerbocker Theatre with 274 performances. Produced by Charles Dillingham, book and lyrics by Henry Blossom, music by Victor Herbert, orchestra under the direction of Max Hirschfeld, orchestrations by Victor Herbert, directed by Fred G. Latham. Scenic design by Frank E. Gates, E. A. Morange, Homer Emmons, Joseph Wickes, and Edward G. Unnett. Costume design by Wilhelm. Synopsis. Kid Connor and Con Kidder, 2 American nincompoofs abroad, are stranded and broke in Katwijk aan Zee, Holland. The two innocent undergo a series of farcical adventures and with the comely Gretchen who loves Captain Carl Van Dam while her father wishes her to wed the governor of Zealand. Connor and Kidder contrive to bring Gretchen together with her intended, despite making an enemy of the governor. A daring rescue in the titular Red Mill and the hilarious series of impersonation by the stars follow. At the end, it is revealed that Van Dam is set to inherit a vast fortune, at which point Gretchen's father removes all objections to their union. Cast: Con Kidder, Fred A. Stone; Kid Connor, David Montgomery; Jan Van Borkum, Edward Begley; David I. Don, Joseph M. Ratliff; the Governor of Zealand, Neil McKay; Gretchen, Augusta Greenleaf; Bertha, Aline Crater; Tina, Ethel Johnson. The creative team is a phenomenon that has seemingly gone the way of the TV Western. Once, All-American Entertainment, stage, film, radio, and television was lousy with teams, usually comic in nature. Film had Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy, Lou Abbott and Bud Costello, Ma and Pa Kettle, and Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. Radio featured Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy, Fibber McGee and Molly, and George Burns and Gracie Allen. The stage boasted Joe Weber and Lou Fields, Bobby Clark and Paul McCullough, and Ed Gallagher and Al Sheen. Today, all but forgotten, one of the most famous successful stage teams consisted of David Montgomery and Fred Stones, who achieved great success in the Victor Herbert musical The Wizard of Oz. Always one to know a good thing when he saw it, Herbert called upon the librettist Henry Blossom to write a show especially for the comic duo. The result, The Red Mill, transcended its purpose as a showcase for the two comics. An exceptional hit in its time, the show was revived in 1945 and ran twice as long as the original. By necessity, the libretto, fashioned around the particular talents of Montgomery and Stone, has dated, but the score is still one of the masterpieces of the American musical theater. Every Day is Ladies' Day and The Streets of New York are two of Herbert's most beloved melodies, still performed today. Certainly a musical of its time and a vehicle for Montgomery and Stone, The Red Mill is occasionally revived with a somewhat updated libretto, and it never fails to amuse and entertain, making the heart soar with its beautiful melodies. Montgomery and Stone, two of America's most beloved performers. David Montgomery and Fred Stone were acrobatic talents who could sing, dance, act, and mime, gaining their fame with the historic 1903 musical version of The Wizard of Oz. Montgomery playing the Tin Man and Stone the Scarecrow. They had met in their early 20s and in 1894 created a blackface song and dance act which they toured in vaudeville for nearly 10 years. They reached the top of the prestigious Keith circuit before making their Broadway debut in The Girl from Up There in 1901, also co-starring in The Red Mill, The Old Town 1910, The Lady of the Slipper 1912, and Chin Chin 1914, among other shows. In between Broadway assignments, they headed vaudeville bills throughout the nation until Montgomery died in 1917, leaving Stone for the first time in his career without a partner. He continued to star in Broadway musicals, including Jack-O-Lantern 1917 and Tip Top 1920, and tried to make a name in silent movies. But theater was clearly his forte. In a sense, he made his family a partner when his daughters, Dorothy and Paula, and wife, Aline, joined his act, known as the Stepping Stones, also the title of one of their musicals. He worked steadily through the next decade before retiring following the 1945 revival of Can't Take It With You. Rose Marie opened September 2nd, 1924 at the Imperial Theatre with 311 performances. Produced by Arthur Hammerstein, book staged by Paul Dickey, music by Rudolf Frlm and Herbert P. Stohart, book and lyrics by Otto Harbach and Oscar Hammerstein II, orchestra under the direction of Herbert Stohart, orchestrations by Robert Russell Bennett, dance arranged by Dave Bennett, gowns and costumes designed by Charles Lemaire, settings by Gates and Morange. Synopsis. Rosemary, a singer in a hotel deep in the Canadian Rockies, is a center of a love triangle. Trader Ed Holly is in love with Rosemary, who in turn loves Jim Canaan. When the Indian Black Eagle is murdered, Ed tries to frame Jim and get him out of the way. Rosemary, knowing the plots of operettas only too well, tells Ed that if he exonerates Jim, she will marry him to save the man she loves. Before the wedding can take place, Sergeant Malone of the Canadian Rookies save the day, clearing Jim of the charges and discrediting Ed. Cast: Sergeant Malone, Arthur Deegan; Lady Jane, Dorothy McKay; Black Eagle, Arthur Ludwig; Edward Howley, Frank Green; Emile Flem, Edward Cianelli; Wanda, Pearl Rigay; Hardboiled Herman, William Kent; Jim Kenyon, Dennis King; Rosemary LaFlamme, Mary Ellis; Ethel Brander, Lella Bliss. There are many reasons why shows are written. Some for money, some for fame, and some for other reasons that have nothing to do with art. The Schubert brothers, Lee and JJ, were known to have songs written for their shows simply because they had a warehouse full of, say, bird costumes or wooden shoes. Similarly, producer Arthur Hammerstein wanted to produce a new operetta but couldn't figure out how to shake up what had become a formulaic style. Instead of changing the way shows were written, he focused his energy on constantly finding new, exotic settings for his operetta to give them variety. Thus, The Three Musketeers took place in France. Naughty Marietta had dibs on New Orleans, and The Merry Widow waltzed in Paris, and The Fortune Teller used the Czardas sounds of Hungary as its background. Hammerstein was at a loss for an untapped locale with his new show until he heard of a winter carnival in Quebec, at the conclusion of which snowshoed revelers took lit torches to the extravagant ice sculptures. Arthur sent his nephew, Oscar, and Otto Harbach to Quebec to see this magnificent ceremony. While the idea for a Winterfest operetta was left out in the cold, the two librettists, now in a Canadian state of mind, looked further west to the Rockies, and voila, Rosemary was born. The idea was so stupendous that two composers would be necessary to write the score. Both Rudolf Friml and Herbert Stothart were hired. Stothart would later achieve great fame at MGM as the incidental musical composer for The Wizard of Oz. And the splendor of the Rockies demanded no less a talent than Mary Ellis, then the star of the Metropolitan Opera, to play the title role. Already Oscar Hammerstein II was working hard to break from convention and create a new kind of musical, and the show marked the first time a murder was the center of an operetta plot. The curtain fell on the two lovers alone on stage, not a typical full company chorale. Hammerstein was even making early strides to interrogate the song and story, for a note in the program read, "The musical numbers of this play are such an integral part of the action that we do not think we should list them as separate episodes." Rosemary became the longest-running musical of its time, surpassing only latter Hammerstein and Jerome Kern's Showboat, which ran 2 weeks longer. There were no fewer than 5 national tours and a first-class revival on Broadway in 1927, and MGM filmed the story twice, in 1936 and again in 1954. Since its debut, Rosemary has become one of the most produced operettas in musical history. Rudolf Friml. Czechoslovakian Rudolf Friml was the ultimate operetta composer. When he tried to write for musical comedy, his romantic themes and broad melodies didn't quite suit the more up-to-the-minute style of jazz-influenced musicals. Friml came to America from Prague as a pianist whose flashy technique served him rather more than the music. When the Metropolitan Opera diva Emma Trentini was cast in The Firefly, 1912, Victor Herbert refused to write for her. Friml gladly took the job and made a smash immediately with both the public and Trentini, with whom he began a passionate affair. Friml's next show, High Jinks 1913, was also a smash hit, with the young composer was on his way. He hit stride in 1924 with the magnificent Rosemarie, and followed that year with another, The Vagabond King 1925, and a few years later, another huge hit, The Three Musketeers 1928. By the 1930s, depression took its toll on Broadway's finances as well as on the public's taste for operettas. Friml wrote two more shows, Luana 1930 and Anina 1934, but both were failures. He spent the rest of his life in California, mainly working on film adaptations of his hits. Dennis King. Dennis King was a strong-voiced, dashing leading man of operetta and early musical comedy. In his Broadway musical debut, in 1924's Rosemarie, King warbled the duet Indian Love Call with co-star Mary Ellis, giving those heretics who roll their eyes at the earnest, heart-on-the-sleeve emotions of musicals a perfect target to spoof. He followed up with other Rudolf Friml operettas, The Vagabond King, The Three Musketeers, and Franz Lehár flop Frederica. Also carving out a career as a wonderful dramatic actor, he returned to singing in 1938, introducing Spring is Here and the beautiful title song of Rodgers and Hart's I Married an Angel, in real-life changing of the guard moment. King's last Broadway musical, the bomb Shangri-La, opened 3 months after the runaway smash My Fair Lady, featuring his son John Michael King. As Freddie Ainsworth Hill, King Jr. sang Oh, the Street Where You Live, a song that 30 years earlier would have been introduced by his father. Cast albums. The invention of the phonograph coincided with the early development of the musical, and these two would share an intimate history from the cylinders to CDs. The first original cast performances captured the posterity were 1890 recordings on cylinder of You Can Always Explain Things Away from Castles in the Air, sung by De Wolf Hopper, the Comrade song from Ship Ahoy, sung by Edward M. Flavor. As Broadway songs became more and more successful, popular singers and bands recorded hits from the shows, and sometimes, as is the case of Al Jolson, stars would record their numbers in a pop fashion without the Broadway orchestrations. In the 1920s, British casts were regularly recording the major numbers from their shows, and by the 1920s, Victor began issuing a series of studio cast recordings of famous scores under the banner of Victor Light Opera Company. These long melodies sometimes constitute the only recordings of the early shows. Victor recorded the Astairs and composer Arthur Schwartz on a series of recordings backed by Leo Reisemann and his orchestra. Victor utilized the recently invented 33 1/3 recording speed for his issue, but it didn't catch on with the public. By the 30s, 78 RPM albums were regularly issued with members of the original casts. In 1938, a set of songs recorded by original cast members of Mark Blitzstein, The Cradles Will Rock, was issued on the Musicraft Records label. It was such a success that Blitzstein's next show, No for an Answer 1941, was recorded again with the composer at the piano. The 1940s saw the emergence of Decca Records as the leader in cast album field. In 1942, Decca released a set of 8 songs from the Irving Berlin revue This Is the Army, featuring an all-soldier cast, and following their release for the hugely successful original cast recording of Oklahoma. Most important shows received some form of cast recording. Jack Kapp, president of Decca, recorded other notable shows, including Carousel and Porgy and Bess. Columbia Records didn't jump on the bandwagon until 1946, with the release of the historic revival of Showboat, a newly formed Capitol Records, founded by lyricist Johnny Mercer, issued his and Arlen's score for St. Louis Woman the same year. RCA finally caught up in 1947 with the original cast recording of Brigadoon. By the 1950s, the cast album was such an important part of a company's bottom line that rights for recordings went to then exorbitant fees. In fact, Under the leadership of the great Goddard Lieberson, Columbia underwrote the entire production cost of My Fair Lady, recouping their investments many times over. Lieberson, urbane, witty, and a little snobby, brought the original cast recording to new heights, recording studio cast versions of early shows that did not have cast recordings, and preserving several flops like Candide, Anyone Can Whistle, and Frank Loesser's entire score for The Most Happy Fella. Show music was so much a part of mainstream music at the time that pop stars regularly covered Broadway scores, as did instrumentalists like Percy Faith and Andre Kostelanetz. During the late 1950s and early 60s, the heyday of the cast recording saw the development of talented producers who specialized in original cast albums. Masters of the form including Andy Wiswell, David Kapp, George Merrick, Hugo and Luini, Dick Jones, Michael Berniker, Thomas Z. Shepard, and J. David Sachs. Changes in the popular taste marked the end of the heyday of the original cast recording. Once rock was firmly established as the premier moneymaker for the labels, expensive Broadway cast recordings were dropped. With the exception of mega hits like Hello Dolly, The Fantastics, or Rent, or anything written by Andrew Lloyd Webber or Stephen Sondheim, most cast albums never recouped their investments. The emergence of the compact disc gave a fresh life to the original cast recordings, and most were reissued, even as new ones went unrecorded. With the majors disinterested, a number of smaller labels popped up to record shows, including TER Records, Varese Saraband, Finsworth Alley, Harbinger Records, and Original Cast Records. As the number and quality of Broadway musicals declined, older shows were given elaborate, complete studio cast recordings to take advantage of the greater playing time of CDs.